Welcome to Transforming Human Consciousness. I am Keyvan Geola, your host, and this program is sponsored by the Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Claremont. Racism is considered to be the most challenging and vital issue facing America today. And Baha'is believe that education in the principle of the oneness of humanity is the shortest way out of poverty and prejudice. We believe that America's peace, prosperity, and even its standing in the international community depends on the healing of the wound of racism and creating a community where people of diverse backgrounds can live as members of one family. Baha'is believe that no serious attempt to set human affairs aright to achieve world peace can really ignore religion. We believe that materialistic ideals have failed to satisfy the needs of humankind, and a fresh effort must now be made in order to find solutions to the agonizing problems of our families, our communities, our nation, and really our planet. The goal of this program is to appeal to the individual American, because the transformation of a whole nation ultimately depends on the initiative and change of character of the individuals who compose it. To help us accomplish this goal, we offer the unique teachings of the Baha'i faith and the empowering example of the unified and yet diverse Baha'i community, which has accumulated over a century of experience in creating models of unity. In this series, we hope to draw on the example and talents of peoples of all ages, cultures, religions, and races who support the spiritual principle of the oneness of humanity. We hope to empower and encourage each and every one of you and to invite you to join us in releasing the inherent potentialities of the age we live in, welcoming the age of the oneness of humanity. I have a very special and distinguished young guest here with me today, Aly Rose. Aly is a student at the Claremont colleges, McKenna College, right? Aly took a year off of her academic learning and went to Poland. And she spent the whole year in Poland experiencing life in a different setting. And I have heard her talk about her experience, and I have heard her talk in front of audiences, and they're just absolutely charmed with her stories and her insight. So I like to explore with Aly today some of the issues that we refer here. For example, maybe my first question is, Aly, education. You gave up, seems like, you gave up a whole year of your education, quote unquote, education, yes. And you went to Poland.
Yes.
Do you think that was a sacrifice? Or do you think that you learned and you grew and it was worth, especially in terms of opening your consciousness, oneness of humanity? Was that a valuable experience?
Sure, I don't think I've grown more in 1 year than when I was in Poland. And I think in terms of sacrifice, I think many of my peers viewed it as she's straying from the academic path, she doesn't know what she wants to do, you know, what does she think she's doing? My parents were nervous as well. But I think in the end, it proved most fruitful for me. I learned an incredible amount about myself, about my strengths, my weaknesses. I learned a lot about giving up my own ethnocentric ideas about how the world should function and what is the standard of right and wrong in terms of cultural evaluation. And I learned a lot to, I think, not sacrifice in terms of giving up something that I treasured, because I always knew I'd come back to my academic work.
To finish your education.
Yes, I think, but what it was sacrifice was my whole idea of what is really important in life and what is the goal and purpose in life. And it's one thing to read on a piece of paper and cognitively say, this is the purpose of life. But when I was there and I saw people and I fell in love with people who I had no ties with in any fashion or form, and that I became close with, who did things completely differently than what I could ever imagine, and I became to love them, then I said, you know, this is it. This is about the oneness of humanity. This is what it's about, living in a world family, in a global village.
Do you think that your travel to Poland, for example, in any shape or form contributed to this global consciousness that we are talking about, these individuals, small efforts that individuals make? Do they make an impact?
Sure, I think one individual can change a tremendous amount within a community, even a nation. I had many experiences with Polish youth teaching English in the private schools there. And they were so curious about everything that we did in the West, and they had so many misconceptions about the way we did things and the idea of wealth in America and what we strive to do and the reason why we do the things we do internationally as well as nationally. Their curiosity was amazing, and so they asked the pettiest questions, from why we wear the clothes we wear to what kind of religions do we have, and how do people relate to one another, and who lives. When I said that Hispanics and African Americans and Caucasians and Indians all lived in my hometown, and we all lived together, and we all lived happily together, they couldn't believe it. This idea for them was amazing. And I think that when you introduce this concept of living and you say that it is real and it is tangible, and then they see somebody who's lived in that way and grown up in that way, then it changes their whole perception of the way things should be, or the way things could be.
So for the Polish people, they cannot conceive, or they haven't experienced living with other people of other cultures?
Well, they're fairly homogeneous. I think they also admire, or they're very proud of the fact that they have a homogeneous nation. There are very few people there who are of different religious backgrounds besides of a Catholic background, and 98% of the country is Catholic, and also 98% of the country is of Polish origin. So you can see how small the minority representation is in the country. So in terms of having what we would say in America as a global consciousness, it means something completely different to them.
What does it mean?
Well, the students, like I asked one of my students in an advanced English class, and they had to write essays. And one of the essay questions was, what do you see for Poland in the next 5 to 10 years? And most of them described a nation which was mostly white, all Polish, Catholic, and so the things that had changed were the socioeconomic problems, but there was no idea or concept of racial diversity. So I asked them then to talk about, orally in class, verbally, about what would happen if you had a large percentage of Africans come into the country, which was happening in Warsaw, or a large percentage of people from Turkey coming into the country, or from China, or from the Middle East. And this was the case in Warsaw, but not in the other small cities in Poland. And I asked them, how does this make you feel? What do you feel is your response? What do you feel will be the result? And it was amazing, their answers, because I thought that it would be welcoming. We have open arms, we welcome this diversity, we're curious, we'd like to know what is going on. But this was not the case at all. In fact, they said, no, they may come for a few years, but then they will leave. And our country will remain white, our country will remain homogeneous, our country will remain Catholic, and this is the way it will be, this is the way it has been, this is the way it will always be.
What is your estimate? Is this going to remain? I mean, is that realistic, at least within a few coming years, 4 or 5 years?
No, I don't think it's realistic at all. I think it's a sense of denial. I think that in actuality, people are pouring into the country from Yugoslavia, from the Middle East, from Turkey, from Africa, and from China. And there are people, if you go to Warsaw and you live in Warsaw, then you see that this is clearly the case. But in any village or town outside of Warsaw, you don't have access to this. And I think in Warsaw, where they're having now racial difficulties or problems with AIDS, you see what we experience in the metropolitan areas in America is the same thing that Warsaw is experiencing now. So it will have to devise some machinery, spiritual or educational, in order to cope with these problems, just as we are having to do the same in America.
Do you feel that Americans have something that they can teach the Polish in regard of the oneness of humanity, the global consciousness?
Oh, sure, I do. I think that, if anything, in America, we have a microcosm of the whole world here. In this way, we're very blessed, because we can show the rest of the world that it can be done. We have, not only do we have the technology, but we also have the people from all over the world living together. So I think if we can arise to the challenge that's been given to us as Americans and say we can celebrate this diversity in a unified manner, we can act in a synchronized manner with all of our talents and faculties, then the rest of the world will rise as well. But I think we are to lead. I really feel we are to lead in this way, spiritually.
How can we do that? I mean, in your perception, as you see the world within your circles, as a student, for example, how can we do that?
I think there are two levels in which we can do this. There's one where we can focus on the way we look at history and also religious teachings.
Okay. Well, I think this is an interesting topic, and why don't we go ahead and take a break, and then we'll come back and we look at that and see how history and also you mentioned
religious spiritual
teaching, how these two would make a difference. I would like to ask everyone to stay tuned, and we will be back after a short break. Well, welcome back to Transforming Human Consciousness. We're going to continue our conversation here with Aly, which I always find very charming and enlightening, truly. We were talking about, you said history and religion. These two, you think that is going to be influential in giving them the insight and broadening the vision. So how do you see that?
History plays a great factor in that. The way history is written and what we focus on in history, especially in Poland, what they focused on in history, it creates the whole perception of what is important, what is valid, and what do we aspire to. So, for instance, history really focused on many of the battles that were won with the Russians, with the Germans, with the Austrians. And so we see that there's this pride when they talk about these battles and the things and their own suffering and pain physically. And we also see that the context in which they've learned about other cultures, about China and about Africa, is very interesting too, because I think that it leads a tremendous slant in terms of understanding that we are world citizens, that we are part of a global village.
How is that understanding? Is it like in terms of one up, one down kind of a thing?
Well, I think the Poles, what I felt generally among the youth is that there was not this sense that we see ourselves as a nation among many, but we see as a nation torn between Germany and Russia, and we will always be ravaged between Russia and Germany. And then they also felt a sense of superiority towards African Americans or Africans. And they used the term nigger very frequently, very casually all the time, and this is the way it was printed in the history book, nigger. And I asked them, what did they feel when they said this? And in the context, it was completely pure, it was innocent. And I explained to them that this term would probably be very offensive for any American traveling to Poland. And they asked me why. And I explained that the term nigger connotes a slave or someone who's inferior to another. And it's a negative. It has extremely negative connotation, it's derogative, and it's an insult. And they asked me what words should they use in its place. And then I explained to them the whole evolution of how we came to the term African American in Africa, or in due respect what we would call African. And I explained that nigger went to Negro, and then to colored, and then to black, and then to African American. And they didn't understand the changes in the language. And I explained that physically, or just on paper, it may seem like a few name changes. I said, but what it really represents is a higher degree, a higher level of respect each time, and a higher level of understanding of where we're all coming from and what we're attributing, what we're giving back to the culture in which we live.
Do they have a point of reference there when you share with them that? Do they have a matrix where they could even try their new knowledge? Do they have access to the African Americans or the Africans? Do they have places where they can really experience this global life interaction?
Well, when I was living in Białystok, which was on the Belarusian border, we had a few, I'd say about 15 students from different parts of Africa. And in the Baha'i community, there were about 4 African Americans, or I'm sorry, 4 Africans. And I know that some of the Polish women became very close to these men and in fact wanted to marry them, but their mothers and fathers refused to. Number 1, because they weren't Catholic, which was most important, and number 2, because they were of a different color. And I think it became very sad for many of the people, or many of the youth, who wanted to see this, who wanted to see these changes come about in Poland. But for generations that were much older and had remembered all the times throughout communism, for them it was very normal. And to break this mold of this mold of conformity would have been devastating, apparently devastating, seemingly devastating for the family. But I think that this is the challenge in Poland, is that right now there is the opportunity to intermarry, there is the opportunity to become close to people from other countries. And it's opening all doors in Poland. And the question is whether they will open it, whether they'll open their arms, and whether they say, yes, we accept, we're curious, we want to know, we want to learn, we want to grow together, or whether they'll close that door and say, you know, thank you. We like to maintain our past culture and our past history, and we don't want to welcome anything in. So I think this is where religion plays a significant part. If the Catholics in Poland, or if the leaders and the clergy say, we'd like to welcome this, and they announce this in the church structure, I think it would be welcomed. And if the publications they allowed to come in the country welcomed it as well, I think that you would see this in the people.
I see.
But if the church doesn't, then the people who follow the church won't either. And this is why I think spiritual teachings play a significant role in the way that our heart feels.
So you think that religion at this point plays a very critical role, depending whether the concept of religion is universal and accepts and welcomes people of diverse backgrounds and religious backgrounds, or whether it shuts its doors and it becomes exclusive.
Sure, and it's not so. The distinction is not so black and white. I mean, there are shades of gray, and there's a lot of subtle things that we don't really distinguish in everyday life that lead one to shut the door as opposed to open it. So I mean, there are many things that I would see on the street where you would be standing in a tram, and there would be the Africans would have to travel during the day, and then when the sun would set around 3 or 4, you would no longer see them on the trams. And this is, well, because the women would hold their children close to them as the men entered the tram, or the women entered the tram, and then they would be treated and stared at in a very bizarre fashion. Bizarre for me, maybe very normal for them. So when I was walking down the street with my friend from Tanzania, everyone stared at us and looked at us in a very peculiar fashion. And it was nice for me because I thought, this is great, you know, this is a challenge for you, this is wonderful for you. But for them, they thought I must be crazy. They thought I was Polish, they thought she must be crazy. What does her mother think of her? For me, this is how embedded racism is. And I think they've learned this also from the West.
How so?
Well, I think when they asked me, how is it that people from all different cultures and races can live together, they talked about the riots and the way they perceived the riots. And it was very interesting to find out that some of the youth in Warsaw felt that the riots had occurred because we never lived together, because we never wanted to live together, and because we've always hated one another. And I asked them, where did they understand this? Where did they learn this from? And they said, oh, we read it in the papers, and this is the way we've come to see it. And I explained, this is not the case. This is not the case at all. It was very sad. But I think this is where America plays a huge role in our international society.
So our role as what we portray and how it's translated outside as a model. They take us as a model of behavior and standards of human relations.
Especially now that communism has fallen, especially now that they feel capitalism in itself is not purely the answer, and communism really isn't the answer, and they're looking, and there's many of the youth are saying the Catholic Church is not providing the answers for us. So what is the answer? And I think in this state of confusion and also in this state of hopelessness, they're really looking to the West for some help, for not only material help, but I think also some type of spiritual guidance.
And for leadership.
Yes.
And in your estimate, as you observed, do they see any good parts or the positive parts of the West?
I think it's very sensational, the fact that we have so many nice things. And I think that is right now it's very tantalizing because they haven't had it. And I think there are now a few people, you have an elite right now in Warsaw that have experienced this and even are feeling this is not really the answer either. So what I think many people in the West are very curious about is the individual expression of Americans, their creativity, their ability to envision, their ability to create, to be innovative. This is very...
To be individual.
To express their own individuality. This was not accepted or tolerated during communism. Everybody dressed the same furniture, the same silverware, the same furniture, the same structure, the same layout in the building. You were a number, you were one among millions. And I think now they long to express what they are, what they feel, what they imagine.
What do you think, Aly, they're going to first get from us? What would be the first things which would be imported and make an impression on them? Would it be the positive? As you observed it.
Well, I think there'll be many. I think right now many things are pouring into the country, and I think it's up now to the Polish to filter out what is beneficial to them and what's healthy for them. So for instance, you see both good and bad. You see new art forms come in. You see this whole idea of different musical expression. You see even African musical expression in Warsaw, and this was very nice. But you also see an expression of pornography. You also see violent movies that were never shown. You also see this, and with this you have just this is an outpouring of all that we have carried in this country, and it's now up to them to filter out what is beneficial and healthy for them.
So the good and the bad.
The good and the bad.
Everything is in there.
Right.
What do you felt was your major contribution as you spent the whole year? What was any stories or any anecdotes that you felt like was meaningful, most meaningful, something special that you remember?
Well, there was one day in the classroom, and it was about this time actually, a year ago, and they'd just been given their exam, one of their exams for English class, and they asked me about how I lived, how I grew up in America. And I grew up in Galveston, Texas, and Galveston is fairly diversified, and we grew up together, and our high school was very mixed. And I explained to them that there was never this feeling growing up that my friend is Indian, or my friend is Persian, or my friend is this. And I told them, when I explained to them that the collection of my friends were all different hues and colors, and that this to me was very important for my growth and ability to love and accept all people, there was really the sense that it is possible, it is hope. And I think anybody who shares any stories from America about where it is possible and where there is love and where there is unity, and then it takes away the fear and the apprehension that the people feel.
Thank you so much. Aly, this is wonderful. I think there's much more to talk about, and unfortunately time is over. I'd like to thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank our audience. And if you wish to share with us your views and comments, please write us care of Baha'i Faith, P.O. Box 686, Claremont, California 91711. And until we meet again, I'm Kevan Geola, your host for Transforming Human Consciousness. Thank you.